Gus Malzahn, you brought up the name. And yeah, I've heard the same thing out of a number of Tennessee fans that thought, why didn't we go with Gus? He finds himself at UCF in a pretty good spot in regards to it's a program that has, because of the undefeated season and then the follow-up to that, the next year is one of the few group of 5 schools that actually has they've got a national brand.
They do.
People know who they are now.
That's right.
And he's in the middle of that Central Florida portion that you just mentioned with Dan Mullen and the Gators visiting USF. Well, he's right there in Orlando. So I would think that Gus is going to be able to find a lot of speed for his offense.
Well, they are 2 hours away from us here in Jacksonville. And I really like that school for a variety of reasons. People may not realize this, but they've got around 70,000 students that are associated with that school. And now Orlando, obviously being a big city, as you know, Mark, they've got a lot of community students that who go there. So I'm not saying they're all on campus, but what I'm saying is they've just got a lot of students there to begin with. We've been talking about this the whole week here, obviously because UCF is so close to us, and where's this going to go? I think the thing that I don't get with this hire is the reaction that UCF has hired Vince Lombardi. I mean, that's almost been the reaction about this hire. And frankly, I just don't understand that. And what I mean by that is, look, Gus is average losing 4 games a year. That is not an elite football coach by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he is 2-5 or was 2-5 in bowl games. And known to be a quarterback whisperer, and this guy who develops great offenses in the SEC. The last few years, they were number 8, number 10, 6, 8, and 11 in the SEC and total offense. Listen, this is not just my opinion. Auburn beat writers, I'm sure if you've heard the same thing. Auburn beat writers have told us that Gus has really struggled in developing quarterbacks. And I think you can start with Bo Nix as a great example of that as far as Bo and his struggles. The other thing that's really perplexed Auburn beat writers is why that they cannot develop under Gus a much better offensive line, particularly at tackle, Mark. They have struggled greatly in that area. So my thing is, look, can he succeed at UCF? So certainly I think he could, but I think people need to put in perspective as to what either happened or maybe better to be said and that did not happen at Auburn, and not have the expectations that are going through the roof at UCL, because I think that's really unfair in this situation. Now, what has not been talked about that much, my understanding is, and I've seen this a couple places, that Phil Longo, the offense coordinator at North Carolina, was a possibility for the job. And Sean Lewis at Kent State, I've seen that mentioned as maybe someone else that they looked at. Now, what I've seen today, as of the last few minutes, Gus has hired Herb Hand with the offensive line. He was at Auburn. And I saw Dave Gibbs' name at Missouri, that he may have made that hire too. And again, I'm going to preference that as something to be checked out as much as anything else. I just saw it on Twitter right before we got on. So, I mean, I think he needs to get coaches who are, who know the South, who can recruit the South. But Mark, I just kind of want to put that to me in perspective of, look, you've made the hire. I understand why you would make the hire, because he's basically probably the best coach with any experience who is available. But I think people really need to step back and look at their expectations of what might go on here, instead of them, as some of the national beat writers have written that he's going to UCF and that he's going to challenge for a national championship, which frankly, at this point, I just don't agree with that at all.
I seem to be right in line with you on this one, Brent, because as soon as Gus Malzahn got fired at Auburn, he suddenly, based on the feedback I received from viewers and from other people in the media as well, turned into one of the greatest coaches in the land suddenly. And if you really look at what Auburn's capable of doing, I understand they play a brutal schedule. They play in the SEC West. They've got to play Georgia every year. They always schedule somebody tough out of conference. I understand it's brutal what they face every year. But I also understand that ever since Pat Dye built what the current or modern Auburn football program has looked like in the early 80s with the help of Bo Jackson starting in 82, Auburn has generally been near the top of the SEC through the Dye years, through the Terry Bowden years. Tommy Tuberville did well again. You know, he had an undefeated team there, of course. You can win at Auburn. You can win. And so for Gus Malzahn, and all credit to going to a BCS championship game, taking a 2-10, a 3-9 team, a winless team in the SEC the previous season, and taking them to the brink. That season, everything fell into place. That Georgia game and the Alabama game, of course, but you've got to compete and be close to have those work for you as well. But since then, I just get the impression from people that they're just resigned that Auburn's never going to compete for much, so you should be happy with 8-4 all the time. And that's, he's lost 4 or 5 games every year he's been there since 2014.
Yeah, well, and look, no further than this year, Mark, when let's be honest, they were gifted that Arkansas game when Bo Nix threw the pass basically backward, and that should have been a fumble and should have been Arkansas's ball, and the game would have been over. And then if you remember the Ole Miss game, where they had another official faux pas in that game on the kickoff, which should have been an Ole Miss touchdown, or at least their football, depending on where you are. And frankly, they got a lot of help from the officials in the Kentucky game. If you remember that game, Kentucky is in a situation where they are controlling the game. Their running back is in the end zone by about a yard. And for whatever reason, that was not called a touchdown as it should have been. So, I mean, the truth of the matter is, they were very fortunate, Mark. This year wasn't it was an average season, but it was close to being an unmitigated disaster. So, and look, Auburn fans, and I know you've heard this like I have, in knowing a lot of the media in the state of Alabama, the Auburn fans have wanted to be rid of Gus for the last 5 years because they knew where the program was going and where the struggles were during this time. So, and I'll be very curious how Brian Harson's going to do and how he will pick up the pace. But to me, and then Gus is talking about being free to be able to call plays, and he's going to do that the rest of his life. Well, I think that when I first heard that, Mark, my question there was, well, I mean, you're the head coach at Auburn. You can do what you want to as far as calling plays. No one's telling you not to call plays. So I thought that was kind of a curious remark, but at the same time, I'm and you said it well. I'm just real curious as to how Gus became an elite coach from the way the debacle happened in the bowl game until what came up on in this period of time.
And I understand a coach wants to sell his program and be appreciative of the opportunity, but UCF is not one of the 20 best jobs in the country.
No. Look, it's a good job. Now sure. I will say this, Mark. I will be very curious, and I really hope they do. I'm a real non-Power 5 guy, frankly, as far as appreciating what those schools have to deal with. And there's been plenty of speculation, and still is with this next round of expansion that's coming up in the middle of this decade, when we redo all the television contracts and hopefully will expand the playoffs. Would a UCF with where they are located with their number of students and so forth, could they be added to one of your Power Five conferences, Mark, at some point? Certainly what they hope to be able to do, and I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying I think they're really on, and I'm with you. It's not a top 20 job, but I still, even with what they have to offer, am wondering in a few years, will they be attractive enough to some commissioners to join their conference?
I restructured the conferences recently, and I sent that northern faction of the ACC to another conference.
Yeah.
The Syracuse, Boston College contingent, right. Pitt, and Boston College. Yeah, I sent those back out of the conference. And this was several years ago when USF was playing better football, sure. At the time when they could have been compared to the bottom 4 or 5 of the ACC. And I inserted UCF and USF into the ACC and thought that that was a good fit and bring it back to being an Atlantic Coast, a true Southern Atlantic Coast conference.
Yeah. Well, you've got the Notre Dame question that I'm surprised no one's asked that yet as far as chiming in with that. Look, that's not going to happen, I don't think, anytime soon. As long as Notre Dame can be an independent, I think they're going to take advantage of that. But at the same time, Mark, wasn't it great? And we cover the ACC too, like the SEC. But it was really great to have them involved the way that they were with the ACC, and they added so much to it. And I do think at some point Notre Dame may be given a deal they can't refuse. So we will see with that. But no, I'm with you. The ACC needs some improvement along that line too. And look, I wonder if some of these teams, Mark, like West Virginia, and again, I know we've thrown geography out the window as far as expansion is concerned, but you really do wonder as far as pragmatics, would some of these schools, Mark, rethink where they are and maybe try to change some of this as one of the major reasons would be their travel schedules?